Hey guys, Boardnell back with you, and on this video I will be reviewing the second episode for comedy Feel Good. So this is brand new comedy. Episode 2 has just aired tonight on Channel 4, but all episodes are up on all 4 now. If you want to just watch the whole box set, there's only 6 episodes in the first season or series, so there you have it. Pretty quick watch if you want to get into it. And yeah, I was positive on the first episode, and I enjoyed this one quite a bit as well. So the storyline in this episode is that George goes off to a friend's wedding, or wedding of a friend, and Mae sort of is struggling with her being left alone for like whatever it is, like a day or a couple of days while George is at the wedding. So it's all about them dealing with being away from one another, with the space, the fact that George thinks then they need to have space, that's a good thing. Mae's kind of asking, well, why didn't you invite me as your plus one? And George comes up with an excuse saying that it's not the sort of thing where there's a plus one because it's such a small wedding, and that kind of proves false, because it's sort of a class thing really, because George has very like kind of upper class or at least middle class sort of roots. So the wedding is in like this big sort of like mansion type place. And yeah, so it's kind of, this episode is dealing with Georgia sort of having like commitment issues in a way. She's very nervous about this new way of life for her, this new experiment in a way with Mae. And one of the things that comes up is that she hasn't told her friends or family that she's seeing a woman. She's kind of covered that side of her life up. There's a gag sort of thing where Mae's on the other end of the phone talking to Georgia. I keep calling her Georgia. It's just Georgia really. But anyway, they're talking on the phone, and then when someone shows up saying, "Hey, is that your boyfriend, George?" George just like, no, I don't want any PPI, pretending it's like a sales call. So half the episode is like George at the wedding, the other half is Mae and the various things she goes through. And for a lot of it, George is very trying to get on with things and trying to say it's good for us to be apart. Just, go to one of your meetings or do something. I'll be back in like 48 hours. And of course, what George is saying makes a lot of sense, but at the same time, it's obviously not healthy that she's suppressing this side of her life, and she's kind of not being open about it. She's not being honest and telling her family and friends about Mae and about this new experience. So it's a really enjoyable episode. It's a really awkward episode, like some of the scenes at the wedding. And I think this series is definitely treading that fine line, that sort of like comedy of embarrassment type thing that we've seen in the past with shows like The Office and 30 Rock and different shows like that. And I think what's really good about like the lead performance, Mae Martin as the lead, is she just has this nervous sort of energy about her. Like she's very like fast talking and quick witted, but she really embodies like this like nervous wreck of a character. And I think that's kind of like really great physical sort of acting. But as I said last week, it's kind of this fine line between what's a performance and what is like what is kind of genuine and her real like vulnerability. And so I think what I like about the way this sort of plays out is just the fact that Mae, um, I think she'll say a lot of stuff that could be like read both ways. It could be read either as her making a joke, or her like just yeah, just something more serious, more straight. And it's kind of the way you can read that is sort of the appeal. And I think that's why this kind of jumps between kind of comedy and drama quite nicely, with sometimes a mix of the two. Like there's a scene quite late on at like one of her like meetings where she's there with Maggie, and there's certain moments like that. There's a couple of really, I mean, it's a pretty funny episode overall, but there's a couple of like really funny scenes actually. Probably the highlight is at the wedding actually, because George's mother is just like this like divorce insurance lawyer, and she's really actually the actress I've seen from something before, I'm not sure what, but she's very entertaining. But at one point, George actually tells like the photographer that she is gay and she has a girlfriend, and the photographer, as it happens, appears to be the only other one there. She says, "Oh, me too," and she says, "Where is she?" About Mae, and George's like, she's not here. We don't have to do everything together." And there's a line about, love should be like a lamp. It should be beside you, not always here, or something like that. And then the photographer says, You're the second person to tell me that today." And she points out George's mother is the other one who told her that. And then she says, and then she kept trying to sell me like marriage or divorce insurance. So that's really, really good. And my other sort of favourite line of the episode is, and I think this is a good example of the sort of awkward type mix of the two, comedy and drama, I'm talking about, because there's like a Skype call between Mae and her parents. As I said, Lisa Kudrow playing her mother Linda, stealing some of the best lines. But on the Skype call, which actually is quite dark at some point, because Mae's very down, and again, it's sort of awkward, the scene, because the father's like this sort of like shadow just there in the background, where Linda, played by Kudrow, just dominates the conversation, and it's like the father just disappears into the background. And so at one point, like Linda is just giving it to Mae, just like picking apart her life choices. And at one point it's revealed that, which comes from Mae, that then she was actually kicked out of the home as a teenager. So there is sort of darkness in here, but it still plays as a very funny scene, because I like the line of when Mae says, "I'm like Pac-Man," and Linda's like, I don't understand that reference. And Mae explains it and says, "Well, I'm just like this like invisible sort of like ghost, or this like sad sort of ghost." And so Linda's like, "Oh, okay, that's a good metaphor. Can I use that for my book?" Which is great. Lisa Kudrow stealing the scene once again. She just delivers the line so sort of matter-of-factory, and just has this really like, again, classic sort of Phoebe, but now a bit older. Just this very sort of like naive kind of, surreal sort of delivery. But it's interesting stuff with George at the wedding, and even before she leaves, when she's leaving, she says to Mae, "I really hate weddings. I don't see why people get married. What's the point of it all?" And So that's kind of a big part of her thing in this episode. Um, and so she goes to the wedding and she's kind of again lying to herself, kind of just sucking it up. And this is where it captures, this sort of class thing, because the people here are really ghastly and it's very sort of like snobby and upper class, but it's a good sort of send up of those sorts of characters. Actually, like, and probably my other favourite scene, which is kind of cringeworthy but just really funny as well, is when like the guy who's getting married, who is like just a total dick. He's like on stage, he's doing like a speech, and he's kind of like, okay, uh, I'm a piece of shit. Everyone knows I'm a piece of shit, but I'll be your piece of shit. Let's get married. And he's like making a big speech of it, and that's a pretty funny scene as well. But anyway, it just slowly dawns on George that she just hates these people and this lifestyle, and that she's lying to herself. At the same time, at one point, Mae, who is just sort of going crazy, at one point she like sends George 28 texts, which is when George has to lay down some boundaries and says, this isn't healthy. So kind of with George on that, you can't really argue with that logic. So Mae goes off to one of her meetings, or goes off to meet her sponsor Maggie. They're supposed to go to a meeting, but Maggie decides to then they need like an outing. So they actually go to like this quite fancy kind of show or some sort of like gathering, and the twist is that it turns out to be like Maggie's daughter who's like hosting it, who Maggie has no contact with, and she ends up calling the police, and we get a random Dennis Quaid reference. Says, I thought I just saw Dennis Quaid, which is when Maggie starts hiding. But yeah, you really don't hear that guy reference enough, probably. So it's also a part about Maggie kind of revealing like truths about herself, and there's kind of a resolution to that later when they do actually go to an AA meeting. But over the course of the episode, George does get more worried about Mae, because she's basically locked herself out of their house because Phil, the entertaining flatmate, he's got himself a job, some sort of like weirdo street job, and so Mae has locked herself out. She's left her wallet and I think her phone in the house, so George can't get hold of her. She's ringing around, tries Phil to try and get him to help, and eventually he does. He goes to the club because that's where Mae has gone, and she's talking to Nick, who's the guy she used to stay with and the guy who like runs the club, and she has a freak out at him. That's like the big moment where she's really melting down in the episode, and Phil kind of comes to her rescue, and Nick he's kind of acting a bit of a jerk, like he's not being very sensitive, but at the same time I think it probably does come out of concern for Mae, because he certainly in the first episode he seemed to be a really solid sort of guy who had her best interest at heart, but yeah, he did come across quite judgmental in this scene. He was kind of saying things like, well, she was never like this when she was staying with me. But anyway, Phil takes Mae home and they kind of bond. You don't see as much of him actually in this episode, but there's this metaphor of like the flower when he was in California, and how it was saying how he grew like a flower. You just needed water. And then Mae says something like, so you're saying I'm a flower? And he's like, no, Mae, I'm just telling you a nice flower story. It's pretty funny. But yeah, George comes home, and there's actually a nice sort of swerve where you see her, and it's kind of really melodramatic, a bit over the top. So I think it maybe gives it away. Then it's probably not really happening. But she comes in, says, "Oh, I've missed you so much," and says, "Do you want to get married?" And Mae's like, "Yeah, yeah." It's a big thing, but then it's revealed it's just in George's head. So there you have it. That's kind of the end of the episode. She gets home, and her and Mae kind of reunite, make up. So yeah, another good episode. I thought that's Feel Good episode 2. As I said, all 6 episodes are online on More 4 or E4. No, not all 4. Sorry, is the catch up service if you just want to watch all 6. But if not, they're weekly every Wednesday, 10 o'clock on Channel 4. So I'll be back next week with episode 3. Stay tuned for more television and film reviews. But thanks for listening, and like and subscribe if you're new to the channel. You can ding the bell on YouTube and get me up on Twitter and online. I'll put the links in the description. But thanks for listening. I'll see you guys again soon. Goodbye.